everyone, you're watching World News Program with me, Miriam Zian. To the headlines. The Zionist entity continues to close crossing points and prevent aid from entering Gaza, leading to a catastrophic humanitarian situation. Hamas confirms that residents may face famine during Ramadan amid warnings of the consequences of violating the ceasefire. Coming up next, Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Shara signs the draft constitutional declaration. The declaration drafting committee announces a 5-year transitional period in the country. In Sudan, the army advances along new fronts in central Khartoum. Al-Burhan affirms his determination to free the country and eliminate the rapid support forces, while UNICEF calls for an immediate ceasefire. And U.S. President Vladimir Putin, U.S. President announces support for the truce proposal, provided the latter leads to long-term peace. And U.S. delegation headed by Trump's envoy arrives in Moscow to begin talks. Hello and welcome to the details of your program. First off, the Israeli occupation continues to close the Karam Abu Salim crossing for the 12th consecutive day, preventing all types of aid from entering the Gaza Strip. According to local Palestinian sources, the continued closure of crossings and blockade of aid for the 12th consecutive day signals a real famine and suffering for more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, amid shortages of essential goods, fuel, and medical supplies. And Hamas warned on Thursday that Gaza residents could face famine again during Ramadan if the international community fails to take responsibility for the situation. In a press statement, Hamas said that Gaza's population has been under siege for the second consecutive week due to Israel's refusal to allow the entry of food, medicine, and fuel, calling it a new starvation crime, urging mediators to exert more pressure on the Zionist entity to open the crossings, allow aid to flow, and put an end to the collective punishment. The government media office in Gaza warned that the Strip is facing an unprecedented humanitarian disaster, calling for pressure on the occupation to open the crossings urgently and without restrictions. The office's Director General Ismail Taubata said that the closure of the crossings and the prevention of fuel imports have led to the closure of dozens of bakeries, threatening more than 2 million Palestinians in the Strip.
We warn of the disastrous consequences of closing the crossings, and we call on the international community and human rights and humanitarian organizations to take action to pressure the occupation to open them without restrictions. Otherwise, we are facing an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe that will be a stain on the world's silence in the face of these crimes.
The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs stated on Thursday that Gaza is facing severe shortages of food, water, and healthcare services after Israeli authorities halted aid entry and cut off water and electricity. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said in his daily press briefing that only 16% of medical service points in northern Gaza remain operational, either fully or partially. And Gaza Civil Defense announced on Thursday that its teams had recovered the bodies of 48 martyrs who were buried inside Al-Shifa medical complex during the genocide. According to its statement, 38 of the recovered bodies were identified by their families and reburied in other cemeteries, while 10 unidentified bodies were handed over to the Forensic Medicine Department of the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. The UN Investigative Committee confirmed that the occupation government has committed acts of genocide and violations against Palestinians across all occupied territories since October 7, 2023. It cited evidence of deliberate attacks on healthcare facilities and criticized the international community for ignoring these violations, warning that newborns in Gaza face a high risk of death. U.S. President Donald Trump has backed away from his previous plan regarding Gaza and the displacement of Palestinians from the Strip, affirming that no one will expel any Palestinian from Gaza. Trump made the remarks during a press conference in Washington with Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin in response to a journalist's question about his earlier stance on expelling Palestinians from Gaza. Hamas welcomed what appeared to be a reversal by President Trump on calls for the displacement of Gaza's residents. Hamas spokesperson Hazem Qasem stated that if Trump's remarks signal a complete withdrawal from the idea of displacing Gazans, then they are welcomed. He also urged Trump to avoid aligning with the far-right Israeli agenda and to push for Israel's full adherence to ceasefire agreements. The media committee in the Tulkarm camp announced on Thursday that 13 Palestinians were martyred and dozens were injured and arrested as a result of the ongoing Zionist aggression on the camp for the 46th consecutive day. In a statement, the committee said that the continuous aggression on the Tulkarm and Nur al-Shams camp has led to the forced displacement of more than 24,000 Palestinians, adding that the occupation forces threatened to shoot anyone attempting to enter the camp.
The ongoing aggression on the city of Tulkarm and its refugee camps has resulted in the martyrdom of 13 Palestinians, including a child and 2 women, one of whom was 8 months pregnant. Additionally, dozens have been injured and arrested, while more than 12,000 people have been forcibly displaced from the Nur Shams camp and another 12,000 from Tulkarm camp. The occupation forces have threatened citizens with arrest and shooting anyone attempting to enter the camp, whether men or women. They are also looting commercial stores after demolishing their doors and vandalizing their contents.
Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Shara signed the country's constitutional declaration on Thursday after receiving it from the Committee of Legal Experts tasked with drafting it. Following the signing, al-Shara expressed hope that this step would mark the beginning of a new era for Syria's reconstruction and development.
God willing, this will be a new history for Syria, one in which we replace injustice with justice, we replace destruction with construction, and we replace ignorance with knowledge, God willing, and in which we also replace suffering with mercy.
The committee drafting Syria's constitutional declaration set the transitional period at 5 years, reaffirming the state's commitment to Syria's unity and its people, while respecting the cultural and linguistic diversity of all Syrians. Committee member Abdelhamid Al-Awad presenting the declaration to interim President Ahmed al-Shara has emphasized that it derives legitimacy from the aspiration to rebuild Syria and was drafted in an environment of freedom, without oversight or restrictions.
وتم تحديد المرحلة الانتقالية ب5 سنوات.
And the transitional period was set at 5 years, following the example of many countries that emerged from internal and external conflict. Establishing popular legitimacy was the new leadership's primary concern, despite the challenging circumstances, alongside building a new legal system rooted in the values of the Syrian people.
يستمد قيمته من قيم السوريين.
Moving on now to Sudan, the Sudanese army has secured control over Al-Manshia and Soba bridges, which connect Khartoum to East Nile on the city's eastern side. In a statement, the Sudanese army also announced its capture of several towns in Blue Nile state while accusing the rapid support forces of shelling vital areas in Al-Fashir, killing 5 children and injuring others. Sudan's Sovereign Council Chairman, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, reaffirmed his commitment to liberating the country from what he described as mercenaries and purging it of the rapid support forces. He emphasized that the army's recent advances in regaining strategic positions in southern Sudan would continue until full victory is achieved. He also stressed that unity between the army and the people underscores Sudan's territorial integrity. And at least 10 Sudanese civilians were killed and 23 others injured in rapid support forces artillery strikes targeting villages near El Fasher. The 6th Infantry Division stated that rapid support forces continue to attack civilians, including displaced persons in shelters, as part of an ongoing battle for control of the last stronghold of Central Authority in Darfur. Top 8 officials told the UN Security Council on Thursday that the conflict in Sudan has created the largest and most devastating humanitarian crisis in the world as the warring parties lay siege to towns and block aid deliveries. The head of the UN Children's Agency Fund UNICEF, Catherine Russell, told the Security Council that famine has taken hold in at least 5 locations in Sudan, where an estimated 1.3 million children under 5 live.
Nearly 2 years into the conflict, Sudan is now the largest and the most devastating humanitarian crisis in the world. With its economy and social services system and infrastructure in near collapse and no end to the conflict in sight, we estimate that nearly 2/3 of Sudan's total population, more than 30 million people, will require humanitarian assistance this year.
The A3+ group called for the protection of civilians in Sudan's conflict zones, particularly women and children. Algeria's UN representative Ahmad Ben Jama, speaking on behalf of the A3+ group during a UN Security Council session on Sudan, expressed concern over violations against civilians, particularly women and children, and called for accountability for the perpetrators.
Civilians in Sudan must be protected. The plight of women, girls, and children is especially important in the application of protection measures. We condemn all forms of violation being committed against civilians, and we call for the necessary investigations to be conducted to identify the perpetrators of these appalling crimes and bring them to justice. We emphasize the need to explore all possible ways to enhance protection for women and girls and to provide them with adequate support, including comprehensive mental health services and safe spaces.
The Jama also called for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in Sudan and a serious dialogue between the parties, free from any external interference.
The military solution, regrettably, seems to be the path chosen by the Sudanese actors. The protection of civilians, particularly women, girls, and children, cannot be realized without laying the foundations of a national, inclusive, meaningful, and Sudanese own political process. To this end, we call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and resumption of dialogue, particularly given the implication for peace and security in the region. We also reiterate our call for the firm and public condemnation of foreign interference in the Sudanese conflict.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that Russia agreed with U.S. proposals for a ceasefire in Ukraine, but emphasized that any truce must address the root causes of the conflict and that many crucial details still need to be resolved. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his Russian counterpart is preparing to reject the ceasefire proposal. Nabil Khazini has more.
Before meeting with the White House envoy, the Russian president cautiously opened the door to the truce proposed by the United States, yet he laid out a series of conditions that must be addressed before Moscow would consider halting the conflict.
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that the cessation should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and would eliminate the original causes of this crisis.
Putin carefully avoided making a decision, postponing any further explanation until after his talks, first with the US Special Envoy, who arrived in Moscow yesterday, and then possibly in a phone call to Donald Trump, who has expressed hope that Russia will do the right thing regarding Ukraine.
We're getting words that things are going okay in Russia, and it doesn't mean anything until we hear what the final outcome is. But they have very serious discussions going on right now with President Putin and others, and hopefully they all want to end this nightmare. It's a nightmare. It's a horrible thing.
But a stark contrast in perspective is clearly evident between Washington and Kiev, as the hope for a positive outcome is not shared there in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky suggests that Putin is preparing to reject the ceasefire proposal, remarks that reveal a deep skepticism in Ukraine.
Putin, in response to the idea of ceasefire at the front, he is in fact preparing a rejection at present. Putin is, of course, scared to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, that he wants to kill Ukrainians.
But how longer can the war continue to ravage the ground? Until a ceasefire is agreed, the fighting persists, with Russia claiming to have intercepted 77 Ukrainian drones overnight, just days after Kiev's largest drone strike on Moscow.
Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune expressed confidence that Djiboutian Mohamed Ali Yousaf's leadership will strengthen African cooperation and advance the AU's Agenda 2063. In a congratulatory message to the new AU Commission chairperson, Tebboune affirmed his belief that under Yousaf's leadership, the Commission will uphold the continent's principles and aspirations.
Your appointment to this high-ranking position reflects Algeria's position in our continent and the trust you have earned at the continental level, thanks to your outstanding competence in serving Africa's interests. I am confident that your experience and skills will contribute to strengthening the Commission, enhancing its performance, and enshrining the principles of good governance within this vital continental institution. As I reiterate my heartfelt congratulations, I reaffirm our full support for you in fulfilling your noble duties, providing you with the necessary assistance, and coordinating with you to serve our country's and our continent's interests.
Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune emphasized the need to strengthen good governance and transparency with the African Union Commission, reaffirming Algeria's full support for its efforts to advance and serve its interests.
Your election to this esteemed position reflects the confidence African nations have in your recognized competence and extreme experience. It reaffirms the high regard you hold across the continent. I am certain that your leadership will strengthen African cooperation, advance the goals of the African Union's Agenda 2063, and uphold the principles of our organization in fulfillment of our founding fathers' vision. Your leadership will serve the aspirations of our peoples for a strong, prosperous Africa, built on security and stability.
The Algerian head of state, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, stated that the appointment of Selma Malika Haddadi as deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission reflects Algeria's regional stature and the trust she enjoys across the continent. In a congratulatory message, Tebboune expressed confidence that Haddadi's diplomatic expertise will contribute to strengthening the AU Commission and enhancing its performance.
Your assumption of this position comes at a time that requires strengthening the foundations of good governance and reinforcing transparency within the Commission of our continental organization, embodying our shared vision of building a strong institution capable of addressing present challenges and shaping the future. As I extend my sincere congratulations once again, I take this opportunity to reaffirm Algeria's full support for your efforts in serving the interests of our continent and our readiness to work with you to enhance cooperation and solidarity among African nations and peoples toward a stronger and more influential African Union.
Ambassador Selma Malika Haddadi assumes her role as AU Deputy Chairperson, reinforcing Algeria's commitment to continental unity and advocacy on the global stage. Hossam Barkan has the report.
A new vision based on devotion to Africa and commitment to the African Union, focusing its work on the goals set by the Founding Fathers and strengthening the principles of unity, key points that form the core of Algeria's vision, rooted in its deep African identity. This vision also guides the work of ambassador and diplomat Salma Malika Haddadi, who has officially assumed her duties as deputy chairperson of the African Union Commission. Drawing from Algeria's status and African dimension and reinforcing the country's diplomatic standing and leading role, from the Organization of African Unity to the African Union, the position of deputy chairperson of the Commission, under the leadership of Ambassador and diplomat Salma Malika Haddadi, represent a confirmation and recognition by African nations of Algeria's role and advocating for the continent in various international forums and global organizations. One of the latest examples of this advocacy is Algeria's repeated calls for United Nations Security Council reform to ensure fairness for Africa and rectify its historical injustice. The vision carried by Ambassador Salma Malika Haddadi takes into account the real causes of the various threats facing the continent. It is rooted in active participation in strengthening joint African action through the mechanisms of the Continental Organization and finding African solutions to Africa's crises, such as those unfolding in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Sudan, and extending to Libya. This is achieved by enhancing collective African efforts for peace, stability, integration, and shared prosperity.
Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf and U.S. Special Representative to Libya, Hannah Tete, exchanged views and analyses on the latest developments in Libya and prospects for resolving the crisis. According to an Algerian Foreign Ministry statement, Attaf reaffirmed Algeria's readiness to fully support the UN envoy, emphasizing that a comprehensive Libyan-led process prioritizing institutional unity is the only path to resolving the crisis.
The resolution of the Libyan crisis can only be achieved through an inclusive Libyan process that excludes no one. The primary objective must be to strengthen Libya's national unity and safeguard its territorial integrity. Any solution must prioritize the unification of all national institutions and the elimination of all forms of division and fragmentation within the Libyan political landscape.
Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf stressed that resolving the Libyan crisis requires ending foreign interference and organizing free and fair elections.
The key to resolving the Libyan crisis lies in putting an end to all forms of foreign interference and enabling Libyans to determine their own destiny. The crisis must be resolved through the organization of free and fair elections that restore legitimacy to Libya's state institutions, ensuring its sovereignty and independent decision-making.
Algeria's permanent mission in Geneva organized an event on the impact of anti-personnel mines on human rights held during the 58th Human Rights Council session of the UN, with over 60 countries and several NGOs participating. Algerian permanent representative to the UN in Geneva, Rachid Bledhan, highlighted the country's efforts since independence to remove 11 million colonial-era landmines.
This event aims to highlight and secure support for the draft resolution on the impact of anti-personnel mines on human rights. Most importantly, it is hoped that this resolution will help honor survivors and victims and support demining efforts. The resolution represents a crucial step toward a mine-free world and a safer future. Since 1963, Algeria has worked to eliminate the legacy of colonial-era mines, adopting a comprehensive national strategy that culminated in its declaration as a mine-free country in 2017.
Iran's envoy to the United Nations, Amir Sayed Iravani, stated that any attempt to pressure Tehran into an unfair nuclear agreement with the U.S. is doomed to fail. Speaking at a UN Security Council meeting, Iravani emphasized that Tehran will not negotiate under pressure or threats, urging for diplomacy to be conducted on the basis of mutual respect rather than coercion. China said on Thursday that it advocates using political and diplomatic means to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue, as it always has, a day before Beijing gears up to host trilateral talks with Russia and Iran. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said at a regular news briefing that Beijing meeting is China's newest diplomatic effort to strengthen communication and coordination to create conditions for the early resumption of dialogue and negotiations. Ties between Iran and Russia have deepened since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022, with a strategic cooperation treaty signed in January. Both have good relations with China. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for tonight's program. Thanks for watching and have a great night.